This particular car was not painted or welded by me. Somebody else did all the welding work on this car. I've never actually done any welding work myself, but I'm going to teach myself how to and fix the car in the background, hopefully. And the reason for doing this video is when I look back at the photographs that the welder sent me on this car, I noticed that he had fabricated many parts and bits and intricate little pieces that you could actually go and buy. For example, usual to take the front wing off an SL and find that the car is rusted in these places here. But once again, what the person did who fixed this car, he ended up refabricating this whole section here and here, when in actual fact those panels and parts are actually available. Imagine how long it must have taken to fabricate all these little bits, weld them together, grind it all down, etc. when you could have just gone and bought this section here. It's not cheap, but it's probably a lot cheaper than the labour associated with patching something together like that. You can see this is the front footwell here. Now this whole panel is available, but what most people will just do is patch and patch and patch. And similarly, the sill sections here, what you'll normally find out is the jacking tube is completely rusted, and you can actually buy the sections of this jacking tube from the SL shop, but you can also buy a panel that fits in here rather than buying the whole sill. And if you're lucky, you can actually get the whole rear sill section with the jacking points attached. You can also buy these panels here if the bottom of yours is rusted. So rather than going to the expense of fabricating or the time of fabricating this panel, sometimes it's easier just to buy panels and drop them in here and here. This panel here is the panel that fits in here. Now actually this panel normally is much longer than this and covers the entire length of the car all the way up to here, but this one that we got off eBay had been cut off, which is fine because we just need the end part where we've got huge chunks missing. So we're going to see if we can fit that panel in there. Panel will kind of fit over there like so, and what we'll be effectively achieving, we're basically replacing all of this rusted out section here all along these seams. You can't probably see it very well in this light. All along here you can see there's rust holes and the metal is very thin, so we will be replacing this whole section here and we'll be making up this section here. When you get an aftermarket panel or panel from Mercedes, it'll usually be coated in something called E-coat, which is electro-diffusion coating, and it's a little bit like powder coating, but it's a wet process. So you'll have a tank of liquid with either epoxy particles or paint particles, and these panels will be dipped into that tank. An electrical current will be passed through, and that'll attract the particles to the metal, and depending on the amount of current that's passed through will allow you to vary the thickness of the coating. So that's normally what's on these panels. And when you get them, what you're supposed to do is you don't sand all of this off because this is actually quite a good protective layer. What you do is you scuff it, and there's a variety of different ways of doing it. What some people do is they just use a scuff pad, the sort of rough Scotch pad that you'd use to do the washing up, and they come in a variety of colours, grey, red and green, and using a red one cut into small pieces just to rub over this, possibly with water, will give you just enough scuffing to ensure that the primer that you put over there will adhere properly to the surface, and then you can paint, put a top coat on depending on what you're doing, chassis black or gloss black or whatever else, some kind of rust proofing. So the thing to do is not just to get these panels and put them straight onto the car, and I'll show you why that is. Okay, this panel here is a genuine Mercedes panel which we bought from eBay, so it hasn't been used, okay, but it's obviously been sitting around for a long time. The label on that panel says 27th of the 8th 1985, so that panel is practically 30 years old. I'm sure they still make these panels. This panel is the inner, sits behind the wing, is normally a lot longer, but you can see that this has got surface rust on it. As I say, this is a brand new panel, genuine Mercedes panel. So If you just put this panel on your car and went to all the trouble of cutting it in and welding it in and just put it on and left it on like that, after a few years what would start happening is this here. Okay, now if you're ever in any doubt about what is on your panel, you can't ascertain whether it's primer, good quality primer, epoxy, whatever else, the thing to do is to sand it all off and prime it either with an etch primer or an epoxy primer, then top coat it with another primer and then put a top coat on top of that. And as I say, this is a very good example of why you can't just put on panels that you get aftermarket or from Mercedes, because they will rust. We're going to take this back to bare metal, get rid of any of this surface rust, and then we're going to prime it. And when you've got a bare metal panel, you've got two choices. You can either use a self-etch primer, or you can use an epoxy primer. The epoxy primers usually come in 2-pack, a 2-stage process, and both of those you can put on bare metal, and the choice of which you use is very much down to you, but there are differences. For example, one of the main differences is if you use an epoxy primer on bare metal, you can actually use a filler over the top of it. For panels like this, new panels, which we have got no dents or dings that we're going to have to fill, we're going to use a self-etch primer, and the acid in the self-etch primer effectively eats into the metal and sticks to that metal really well. And also any primer that you put on top of that, like a high build primer, etc., will adhere to that self-etch primer really well. So we're going to be using a self-etch primer. We'll probably use self-etch weld through primer, because once again, all along here, these are going to be welded surfaces along here, and what we don't want to happen is the primer to burn away when we actually start welding. Now, to get this e-coat or epoxy primers or whatever it is on there off is quite tricky, because it's adhered very, very well, and there's no point in trying to use a wire wheel like that. With a drill, you'd be there all day long. If you're going to use a drill, you don't have an angle grinder, you're going to need one of these more aggressive twist wire things to get this off. Similarly, with an angle grinder, you can either use a twisted wire thing like that, or you might be able to use a flat disc like that on an angle grinder, making sure that you don't dig in and actually start grinding away the metal. So we're going to have a go at stripping that down to bare metal. The way to strip this off is with a flat wheel, but you need to be very careful, because these flat wheels are designed for grinding down welds, etc., and they will have a propensity to take off metal as well as just the paint. Well, that took an awful long time to get that back to bare metal, but we finally succeeded. We started off using that's a little bit too aggressive, and actually found that this twisted wire wheel on a drill worked best. So we're now going to spray this up with the Bilthamber etch weld, and that will prime it and also allow us to weld through where necessary. Having got this panel back to bare metal, we're just going to give it some light coats of this etch primer. It'll go on quite as smoothly as I'd like, I have to say. It's actually quite difficult to spray that etch primer. I'm loath to go on with too thick a coat, because you'll just cause runs, but what we're really most concerned about is where we're going to be welding up along here, spot welding, that we don't burn the primer away, and similarly down here as well. The last part of this video is going to be all about how to look up the part numbers for these type of panels, repair panels, where to find them, how to look up the price, etc. And then in the next video we're probably going to have a go at using our spot weld drill to drill out the existing spot welds on this inner wheel arch repair section, seeing if we can remove it and fitting up these panels, possibly fabricating the bits that are missing, and setting about doing some welding. If you need to find a part number for your Mercedes, a very good site for getting part numbers is the mb-tylercatalog.info site. And when you first go to that URL, on the right hand side you're going to want to click on the language. So if you're English or American, you're going to be clicking on that, but you can see they've got a whole range of different languages. Okay, and then down here, you're going to want to click on car, like so. And then you'll see all the different models. Now, our particular car is a 280 SL. You might have a 350 SL or 450 SL or some other SL, but we're going to go on 280. Okay. And then it's going to list all the different types of 280 that Mercedes do. And down at the bottom, you're going to find a 280 SL, which is EC. And over here, it's going to ask you what kind of 280 SL you've got. Our VIN number starts 107042, so that's us there. And then you're going to get a list of all the various different sections in the Mercedes-Benz parts catalogue. We are interested in the front wall, I believe. It's called, some of these translations will not be perfect. And then we're interested in the wheel installation, front axle support. Okay, so then you've got the picture. This is the picture that Mercedes basically would bring up. And let's just, an example, look at this inner arch repair section. It's part number 11, listed down here. You just scroll down till you find part number 11. You will find the left strut and the right strut with the part number. Now we're doing the right hand side of our car here, so I'm just going to copy that number there, and then I'm going to go to, and this is how I do it in the UK, the SL shop. In America, you could got many different options, but here in the UK we're quite limited. And we're just going to go to R107 parts to see what this part costs, and we're going to paste in the part number and search. Okay, and there you will see the rear, that section there, £52.98, absolute bargain. So basically you can use that MB tile catalogue site to look up any part numbers, and then you can check eBay, Amazon. In America, you've got a huge variety of sources. Over in Europe, you've got things like the SL shop. You've got, I've mentioned it before, where I've had panels from, MB classic parts, etc. But if once you've got the part number, you can just put that part number into Google, and then you'll find a whole list of places, and you just need to find the cheapest part. I hope that's helpful of how to use that MB Tyler catalogue site. I'm going to do a whole separate video on etch weld and weld through primers, and actually put this to the test, but we got a aerosol for £10.95 plus VAT from Built Hamber. These are the guys that do the rust removal crystals that we've been using on that SL. So we've got a whole load of other stuff at the same time, but that's where the etch weld came from.